The rain hammered against my bedroom window that October night, creating a rhythm that should have been soothing, but instead felt ominous. Each droplet seemed to carry a message I couldn't quite decipher, tapping out an urgent Morse code against the glass. I jolted awake at 3:17 a.m., my heart racing from a dream so vivid it felt like a memory burned into my consciousness. In it, I watched my sister Scarlett's car disappear into a thick fog on a desolate highway, her taillights fading like dying embers until there was nothing but darkness and the sound of my own voice calling her name into the void. The dream had been more than just a nightmare. It was a complete sensory experience. I could still smell the damp earth, feel the cold mist against my skin, and hear the eerie silence that had followed her disappearance. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and my hands trembled as I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand. I sat up in bed, running my hands through my hair, trying to shake off the lingering dread that clung to me like a second skin. Dreams were just dreams, I told myself repeatedly, but the mantra felt hollow. This one felt different, more real than any nightmare I'd ever experienced. The details were crystal clear. The specific stretch of highway with its guardrails and mile markers, the dense fog rolling in like a living thing with malevolent intent, and Scarlett's face in the rearview mirror, her eyes wide with fear before everything went black. I had always been protective of Scarlett, especially since our parents had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that my worst fears always seemed to involve losing her the same way. But this dream felt like more than just my subconscious working through trauma. It felt like a warning. The next morning arrived grey and overcast, with heavy clouds hanging low over Queens like a suffocating blanket, matching my mood perfectly. The October air carried the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. I stumbled into the kitchen of our small apartment, still groggy and disoriented from my restless night, where Scarlett was already packing sandwiches into a cooler, humming softly to herself. At 23, she had this infectious energy that could light up any room, a quality that had helped her excel in her work as a social worker, despite the challenging cases she handled daily. Her optimism was genuine, born from a deep belief that people could change and situations could improve with the right support. Seeing her so cheerful should have lifted my spirits and chased away the shadows of my nightmare. Instead, the memory of my dream made my stomach churn with an anxiety I couldn't rationalize away. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, not looking up from her preparations. Her movements were efficient and practiced, the result of years of organizing community events and managing crisis situations at work. "I'm heading out to the Adirondacks today, remember? Sarah's family has that cabin near Lake George, and we're planning to spend the weekend hiking and just getting away from the city noise. You know how much I need this after the week I've had." I watched her move around the kitchen, noting how she carefully wrapped each sandwich and checked her supplies twice, habits she'd developed from years of being responsible for others' well-being. The dream came flooding back with renewed intensity, and I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. "Scarlett, maybe you should postpone the trip. The weather forecast doesn't look great, and those mountain roads can be dangerous when it's foggy. I checked the weather service this morning, and they're predicting heavy mist in the higher elevations." She paused and looked at me with that expression she always wore when she thought I was being overprotective, a mixture of affection and mild exasperation that I'd seen countless times since our parents' death. "Jackson, I'm a grown woman. I've driven those roads before, and my car is in perfect condition. I just had it serviced last week, remember? Besides, Sarah and her friends are counting on me. We've been planning this for weeks, and after the Morrison case I've been handling, I really need this break." The Morrison case, I knew it had been weighing heavily on her. A family struggling with addiction and poverty, children caught in the middle, and Scarlett working overtime to find solutions that seemed increasingly elusive. She'd been losing sleep over it, and I understood why she needed this escape. I wanted to tell her about the dream, but how could I explain that I was terrified because of something that happened only in my sleep? She'd think I was losing my mind, or worse, that I was letting my own trauma from our parents' accident cloud my judgment. Instead, I tried a different approach. "What if I came with you? I could use a break from the city too. I've been working on that corporate rebranding project for weeks, and I'm starting to see logos in my sleep. You hate camping and you know it," she laughed, but her expression softened as she recognized the genuine concern in my voice. Remember last summer when I convinced you to go to that state park? You complained about the mosquitoes for 3 days straight and insisted on sleeping in the car because you were convinced there were bears lurking around our tent. She was right, of course. I was much more comfortable with my computer and design software than I was with nature and outdoor activities. But the dream had left me with such a powerful sense of foreboding that I was willing to endure any discomfort to keep her safe. Look, I know you worry about me, especially since Mom and Dad aren't around anymore to do the worrying themselves, she continued, her voice taking on a gentler tone. But I promise I'll be careful. She'll call you when I get there and I'll check in every few hours. I'll even call you before I leave on Sunday. Deal? I nodded reluctantly, knowing that arguing further would only make her more determined to go. Scarlett had always been stubborn, a trait that had served her well in her job as a social worker, but sometimes worried me when it came to her personal safety. She had this unwavering belief that she could handle whatever life threw at her, and most of the time, she was right. As she finished packing, I found myself memorizing every detail of her face, the way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled, the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident, the determined set of her jaw when she was focused on a task. The thought that I might not see her again sent a chill down my spine, and I had to look away. Just promise me you'll turn around if the weather gets bad, I said, my voice more urgent than I intended. No mountain view is worth risking your life. And if the fog gets thick, pull over and wait it out. Promise me. I promise, she said, giving me a quick hug that smelled like the vanilla perfume she'd worn since college. I'll see you Sunday night. Try not to worry yourself sick while I'm gone. Maybe work on that personal project you've been putting off, the one about designing book covers for independent authors. I watched from the window as she loaded her car with practiced efficiency, double-checking her emergency kit and making sure her phone charger was easily accessible. Her hand waved goodbye until she turned the corner and disappeared from sight, leaving me with an emptiness that felt far too familiar. The apartment felt impossibly quiet without her presence, filled only with the distant sounds of city traffic and my own anxious breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen, and for the first time in years, I found myself wishing I believed in prayer or fate or anything that might give me some sense of control over the universe's apparent randomness. Saturday passed in a blur of restless energy and mounting anxiety that no amount of rational thinking could dispel. I tried to distract myself with work. I had freelance graphic design projects that needed attention, including a logo redesign for a local restaurant and a brochure layout for a non-profit organization, but I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for Scarlett's promised call, unable to focus on color schemes or typography when my mind was consumed with worry. The morning stretched endlessly, each hour feeling like a day. I attempted to work on the restaurant logo, but every design I created seemed to incorporate elements from my dream. Winding roads, fog-like swirls, disappearing elements. Frustrated, I abandoned the project and tried to clean the apartment instead. But even mundane tasks couldn't quiet the voice in my head that insisted something was wrong. When Scarlett's call finally came around 6 in the evening, I nearly dropped the phone in my haste to answer, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hey Jackson, I made it safely to the cabin. The drive was beautiful and the weather held up perfectly. You worry too much, big brother." Her voice sounded clear and happy, filled with the contentment that always came when she escaped the city's chaos. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders, though a knot of anxiety remained lodged in my chest. "I'm glad you made it okay. How's the cabin? Is it what you expected?" "It's perfect. Right on the lake, with this amazing view of the mountains. Sarah's family really knows how to pick a spot. The cabin has this huge stone fireplace, and we can see the water from every window. We're planning to start our hike early tomorrow morning, so I might not be able to call until later in the day. Cell service is pretty spotty up here, especially on the trails." We talked for a few more minutes about her plans. They intended to hike to a waterfall that Sarah had visited as a child, then spend the evening around a campfire sharing stories and enjoying the peace of the mountains. I told her about my struggles with the restaurant logo, and she suggested incorporating elements that represented the establishment's farm-to-table philosophy. "You always overthink your designs," she said, with the affectionate criticism of someone who knew me too well. "Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones. Trust your instincts." By the time we hung up, I felt foolish for letting a dream affect me so much. Scarlett was fine, having a great time with her friends, and I was sitting in Queens worrying about nothing. I managed to return to my work with renewed focus, even making progress on the non-profit brochure, which featured a community garden project that reminded me of Scarlett's passion for helping others. Sunday morning brought clearer skies and a lighter mood. The autumn sun streamed through our apartment windows, highlighting the dust motes that danced in the air and casting everything in a golden glow that felt hopeful. I actually managed to get some substantial work done, completing the restaurant logo with a design that incorporated subtle mountain elements, a subconscious nod to where Scarlett was spending her weekend. I even went for a run in the park, something I'd been neglecting lately in favor of long hours at my computer. The physical activity helped clear my head, and I found myself appreciating the changing season, the way the leaves had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, the crisp air that carried the promise of winter, the families enjoying what might be one of the last warm weekends of the year. But as the day wore on and evening approached, I found myself checking my phone more frequently again. Scarlett had said she might not call until later, but it was already past 8, and I hadn't heard anything. I tried to rationalize my growing concern. She was probably having such a good time that she forgot to call, or maybe her phone battery had died, despite her usual careful planning. By 10 o'clock, I was pacing the apartment, my earlier calm completely evaporated. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the distant sounds of the city that never slept. By midnight, I was calling her phone repeatedly, only to reach voicemail each time. Her cheerful recorded message, "Hi, you've reached Scarlett. I'm probably helping someone or having an adventure. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can," became increasingly mocking with each repetition. I barely slept that night, dozing fitfully on the couch with my phone clutched in my hand, starting awake every time I heard a sound that might be her key in the door. When Monday morning arrived with still no word from Scarlett, I knew I had to take action. The dream that had seemed like an irrational fear now felt like a prophecy I should have heeded. I called her workplace first, hoping against hope that she had simply decided to extend her weekend and would answer her office phone with some reasonable explanation for her silence. But her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, told me she was expected in that morning for an important meeting about the Morrison case and hadn't called in sick. "That's not like Scarlett at all," Mrs. Chen said, her voice reflecting the concern I felt. "She's never missed a meeting without calling, especially not one this important. Have you tried contacting her friends?" That was the problem. I didn't have Sarah's contact information, and Scarlett's phone was still going straight to voicemail. I had a general idea of where the cabin was located, but the Adirondacks covered thousands of square miles, and I was essentially searching blind. By Monday afternoon, I was in my car driving north toward the Adirondacks, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white and my arms ached from the tension. I had called the local police, but they told me it was too early to file a missing person report. Adults had the right to extend their trips without checking in with family, and 48 hours hadn't passed since anyone had last heard from her. "People lose cell service in the mountains all the time," the desk sergeant had explained with practiced patience, "and sometimes they just decide to stay an extra day or two. We suggest you contact her friends first, maybe drive up there yourself if you're really concerned." The problem was, I didn't have Sarah's contact information, and Scarlett had always been private about her friendships, not wanting me to feel like I needed to know every detail of her social life. I knew Sarah worked at a law firm downtown, but I didn't know which one, and there were hundreds of lawyers named Sarah in New York City. As I drove deeper into the mountains, the landscape became increasingly remote and beautiful in a way that should have been calming, but instead felt ominous. The fall foliage that tourists traveled hundreds of miles to see, brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows that painted the mountainsides like a living canvas, instead reminded me of fire and warning signs. When patches of fog began to roll across the highway, my dream came rushing back with terrifying clarity. This was the road from my nightmare. I was certain of it. The same guardrails, the same curve of the asphalt as it wound through the mountains, the same sense of isolation that made every mile feel like a journey into the unknown. My hands began to shake as I recognized landmarks that I had never seen in waking life, but knew intimately from my dream. I stopped at every gas station, diner and lodge I could find, showing Scarlett's picture, a recent photo from her birthday party where she was laughing at something I had said, her face bright with joy, and asking if anyone had seen her. Most people were helpful but had nothing useful to offer. The mountains attracted thousands of visitors every weekend, and one young woman among so many was difficult to remember. It wasn't until I reached a small town near Lake George that I finally got a lead. The town was the kind of place that existed primarily to serve tourists, a main street lined with shops selling souvenirs and outdoor gear, restaurants advertising authentic mountain cuisine, and gas stations that charged premium prices for the convenience of being the last stop before the wilderness. "Yeah, I remember her," said the clerk at a roadside convenience store, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and weathered hands that spoke of years of outdoor work. He studied Scarlett's photo carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Pretty girl, bought some snacks and asked for directions to the Morrison cabin. That was Saturday afternoon, maybe around 3 o'clock. She seemed excited about her trip, mentioned something about hiking to a waterfall. Haven't seen her since, though." The Morrison cabin. At least now I had a name to work with, though the coincidence of the name matching Scarlett's difficult case at work sent another chill down my spine. The clerk gave me general directions, warning me that the road to the cabin was narrow and winding, especially dangerous in fog or poor weather. "That road's claimed a few cars over the years," he said soberly. "Folks don't realize how quickly the weather can change up there, especially this time of year. You be careful now, and if the fog rolls in thick, you pull over and wait it out. No sense in taking unnecessary risks." As if to emphasize his point, thick mist began rolling in as I left the store, reducing visibility to just a few yards and transforming the familiar world into something alien and threatening. The fog seemed to have a life of its own, swirling around my car and creating shapes that looked almost human in my peripheral vision. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the fog like weak flashlights barely illuminating the road ahead. Every turn made my heart race, and I found myself reliving my dream with each mile, the line between nightmare and reality becoming increasingly blurred. The GPS on my phone lost signal, leaving me to navigate by the clerk's hand-drawn map and my own increasingly unreliable sense of direction. When I finally found the turn-off to the Morrison property, it was nearly dark, and the fog had become so thick I could barely see the road ahead. The narrow dirt road wound through dense forest, branches scraping against my car windows like skeletal fingers. Every shadow seemed to hide potential danger, and every sound made me jump. The cabin sat on a bluff overlooking the lake, its windows dark and unwelcoming against the grey evening. It was larger than I'd expected, a beautiful log structure that probably cost more than most people made in a year. But in the fog and fading light, it looked abandoned and somehow sinister. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The silence was complete, except for the gentle lapping of water against the shore far below and the whisper of wind through the trees. Walking around the property, I found tire tracks in the muddy driveway, but they were too obscured by rain and time to tell me anything useful. Multiple cars had been here recently, but I couldn't determine which tracks might belong to Scarlett's vehicle. Her car was nowhere to be seen, and a growing sense of dread told me that my nightmare was becoming reality. I spent the night in my car, unable to bring myself to leave without answers, my sleep fitful and filled with fragments of the same dream that had started this nightmare. Every sound in the darkness, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the distant splash of something in the lake, made me start awake, hoping it might be Scarlett returning safely. When dawn broke, the fog had lifted enough for me to see the lake clearly, and that's when I spotted something that made my blood run cold and confirmed my worst fears. Down by the water's edge, barely visible through the morning mist, was the glint of metal that didn't belong in the natural landscape. I scrambled down the steep embankment, my heart pounding with each step, branches tearing at my clothes and loose rocks sliding beneath my feet. The slope was treacherous, made more dangerous by the dew that had settled on everything during the night. There, partially submerged in the shallow water near the shore, was Scarlett's car. The sight hit me like a physical blow. Her reliable Honda Civic, the car she had saved for months to buy, now sat at an impossible angle with its front end underwater. The driver's side door was open, and the interior was filled with lake water and debris, leaves, mud, and the remnants of her weekend supplies floating in a heartbreaking tableau of interrupted plans. My hands shook as I called 911, barely able to form coherent words through my panic and grief. My sister's car in the lake, She's been missing since Sunday." The dispatcher's calm, professional voice seemed to come from another world as she asked for location details and assured me that help was on the way. The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency responders, search and rescue teams, and endless questions that I answered in a daze. State police officers photographed the scene and took my statement, while dive teams searched the murky water for any sign of Scarlett. Paramedics stood by with equipment I hoped they wouldn't need to use. The search expanded beyond the immediate area as it became clear that Scarlett wasn't in the car. Volunteers arrived from the local community, people who didn't know her but understood that someone's daughter, someone's sister, was missing in their mountains. They spread out through the forest with practiced efficiency, calling her name and searching every ravine and thicket. As the hours passed, I found myself thinking about our childhood, about all the times I had worried about her and all the times those worries had proven unfounded. She had always been the brave one, the one who climbed higher trees and stayed out later and took risks that made our parents grey before their time. But she had also always been smart, always been careful when it mattered. They found Scarlett about 50 yards from the car, unconscious but alive, suffering from hypothermia and a head injury. She was discovered by a volunteer searcher, a local teacher who had taken the day off to help look for her. She was lying in a small clearing, partially hidden by fallen leaves, her body temperature dangerously low but her pulse steady. The paramedics worked quickly, wrapping her in warming blankets and starting an IV as they prepared her for transport to the nearest hospital. I rode in the ambulance, holding her cold hand and talking to her unconscious form, telling her about the work projects I had finished, about the weather in the city, about anything that might anchor her to the world of the living. At the hospital, as I sat beside her bed waiting for her to wake up, the pieces of the story slowly came together through conversations with the police and the medical staff. Sarah, her friend, had become ill Saturday night with what appeared to be food poisoning, and the group had decided to cut their trip short. Scarlett had left early Sunday morning to drive back to the city, wanting to give Sarah space to recover and not wanting to impose on the family's hospitality. But the fog had rolled in unexpectedly thick, much earlier than the weather service had predicted. The mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable, and what had started as a clear morning had quickly become a dangerous situation. She had missed a turn in the poor visibility, a curve in the road that was marked but not well lit, and had driven straight off the road into the lake. The impact had been relatively gentle. The car had slid down the embankment rather than crashing violently, but she had hit her head on the steering wheel and been disoriented. She had managed to get out of the car, probably acting on instinct and adrenaline, but in the fog and her confused state, she had wandered in the wrong direction, away from the road and deeper into the forest. She had spent nearly 2 days lost in the woods, surviving on stream water and the few snacks she had grabbed from her car before it became completely submerged. The head injury had affected her sense of direction, and the fog had persisted longer than usual, making it impossible for her to orient herself or find her way back to civilization. When Scarlett finally opened her eyes Tuesday afternoon, the first thing she said was my name. "Jackson, how did you find me?" Her voice was weak and hoarse, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I squeezed her hand, tears streaming down my face as relief flooded through me. "I had a dream," I said simply. "I dreamed you were in trouble and I couldn't ignore it. I knew something was wrong when you didn't call Sunday night." She looked at me with wonder and gratitude, her eyes still unfocused from the concussion, but filled with recognition and love. "You saved my life. If you hadn't come looking for me when you did," she didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew how close we'd come to losing each other, how easily this story could have had a very different ending. The doctors said she would make a full recovery, though it would take time. The hypothermia had been severe, but not life-threatening, thanks to the relatively mild October weather and her own physical fitness. The head injury was more concerning, but the CT scans showed no permanent damage, just a concussion that would require rest and careful monitoring. As I watched her sleep that night, I thought about the dream that had seemed like such a curse, but had actually been a blessing. Sometimes the things that frighten us most are the very things that prepare us to face what's coming. I didn't understand how or why I had dreamed of her accident before it happened, but I was grateful beyond words that I had listened to that inexplicable warning. Scarlett returned to work a month later, though she took a reduced caseload while she fully recovered. We both learned to appreciate the ordinary moments we'd once taken for granted. Shared meals, casual conversations, the simple comfort of knowing the other was safe. She never went on another solo trip without a detailed itinerary and regular check-ins, and I never again dismissed the power of intuition, even when it came in the form of a nightmare. The experience taught us both that family isn't just about being there for the good times. It's about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, even when you can't explain why. Sometimes love means listening to the voice that tells you to act, even when the world tells you you're being foolish. That dream may have terrified me, but it also saved my sister's life. And for that, I'll always be grateful for the mysterious ways our hearts warn us when the people we love are in danger. We never found a rational explanation for my premonition, but we didn't need one. Some things in life are beyond understanding, and sometimes that's exactly as it should be. So thank you for watching this incredible story of intuition and family bonds. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories like this one. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're joining us from today. Remember, we bring you new stories every single day, so make sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and the people you love. See you in the next video.